You're listening to Modern Intimacy, a show about mental health, sex, relationships, and the private things we need to talk about more publicly. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Balestrieri. As a licensed psychologist, certified sex therapist, certified sex addiction therapist, and PACT trained couples therapist, I help people live more fulfilled lives by shattering stigma, erasing shame, and building connections. It's no secret that we live in a society that compartmentalizes mental health and sex from our everyday lives. On this show, we're going to change that, and we'll do it by getting curious together. In this podcast, I'll invite you to join me as I investigate the relationship between sex, mental health, relationships, and modern society. In each episode, it's my goal to provide safe, smart, dimensional, and practical answers to those complex questions you've been wondering about. Head on over to modernintimacy.com/podcast for show notes and resources, or to submit a question or topic you'd like me to explore in future episodes, as well as to find all the links to follow us on your favorite podcast apps so you don't miss an episode. Don't forget to follow me on TikTok and Instagram at Dr. Kate Balestrieri for daily tips on how to improve your mental health, sex, and relationships. Everyone has questions. You are not alone. On this show, I make information accessible because everyone deserves to have more integrated, healthy, and sexually satisfying relationships. Thanks for joining me. Let's get started. For those who call themselves feminists, it's an easy decision. The decision to treat everyone equally, regardless of gender, regardless of race, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of religious ideation, regardless of any of the things that make us diverse and unique. But feminism can be an incredibly polarizing word, and there are a lot of misconceptions about what feminism really means and what the goals of feminists are. Another question I hear a lot is, can men even be feminists? Well, joining me today on the Modern Intimacy podcast is Evelyn Nam. Evelyn is famous on TikTok and Instagram at Herspective. And Evelyn's work as a gender scholar is absolutely turning heads and shattering paradigms. Evelyn is incredibly insightful, and her quest for bringing awareness to the true meaning, purpose, and benefits of feminism are ringing loudly across the world. So join me now as Evelyn and I talk about what is men's role in feminism and how can they be a strong ally.
I'm going to call you goddess of gender scholar because you have been so awesome on TikTok and Instagram. I really have appreciated your content so much. And being a feminist and a staunch feminist for as long as I have been, I'm still learning new things from you. And so I just really appreciate it.
Oh my goodness, that means a lot coming from you. I mean, you're doing really amazing work too. So that really means a lot from you. I mean, that really means a lot coming from you. And thank you so much for inviting me today.
Yeah, of course. Well, tell me a little bit, if you can, about kind of how you got into this work. You know, what led you to be a gender scholar and to focus so fervently on these issues?
I always had sympathy for women. Like I had an intellectual understanding, like by sympathy, I mean, I always had an intellectual understanding of that objectively an abstract, some type of system is against women. So odds are stacked against women. I knew that. And there was an intellectual understanding. So when people say protect women, protect children, like that felt right to me. That sounded right to me. But I had no idea. I didn't know that I was also a product of patriarchy and misogyny, and I had all these internalized, really, really messed up stuff. I was a sexist, I was a misogynist, like all these things. And so when I studied labor in college, and I started looking at labor history and how women's labor in particular is being treated in the market, and how this entire economy is exploiting women, and how this entire economy is not made possible without women's labor, but yet we're treated like crap. So this, I started looking at women and women's struggle through, from the framework of labor. And that's how I connected my sympathy to oh my God, like I need to do something about this. So so more studying in college and studying labor really helped me convert my sympathy into empathy. It was getting clear to me that, I was lied to. Because growing up, I thought that men were in charge and they were the ones who constructed humanity. They were the leaders. They were all these great figures. Like if they were the presidents. And I now looked at the world and oh my God, like these men were in charge on the backs of women, on the backs of women. Like women were constantly being like we were the ones who were holding their back because they can't stand their own. So that revelation was I remember very striking to me. And I remember thinking, I got to study government and religion because these two institutions are leading that exploitation and leading the female oppression. And while studying those two institutions more deeply, I remember that empathy slowly being converted into compassion, which is, I figure, and compassion, I feel like, is such an unruly and like urgent emotion. Like you have to do something, like you have to do something. So that's how I got into activism and advocacy. And then I started meeting a lot of women who would share their stories with me. And it all started making sense. Like if we don't smash patriarchy, if we don't do something about this female oppression, this world, the problems that we have in this world, global threat to security, environmental threat, like name all the societal ills that we see in the world, they are not going to stop because it all connects to patriarchy and female oppression. Making the world a better place without feminism does not make sense. That's not a thing. That is not real. So anybody who's not serious about feminism, who is saying, I want to make the world a better place, he or she, I say he because it's most of the times it's men, he is living with one eye open. So that's kind of that's kind of how I became so dedicated to the cause, and I think it's my lifelong mission.
Well, that's amazing. And to be clear for our listeners who maybe haven't seen your TikTok or Instagram yet, what exactly did you pursue educationally? So what were your studies? What have your degrees been in?
At Cornell, I studied industrial and labor relations. And then at Harvard, I studied public policy and then theological studies.
Okay.
My specialization was religion, ethics, and politics. So it's I studied the two institutions that I was just talking about, which are
politics and religion.
Yeah.
They play such an interesting role in both, I think, the progress and the regress of our collective experience as humans. And so I know that a lot of people get very quick to shut off their ears when people start talking about politics or religion. And I hope that for those listening, maybe you can extend a little bit more patience for that conversation, because certainly my perspective is not to bash the function of a lot of these different institutions, but to get curious about how did they get to where they are today? How can we improve them and make them better, as objectively as any of us can? So from my perspective, coming from a position of mental health, I often see these systems of oppression, whether we're talking about sexism, racism, classism, all of the isms, they really get in the way of people being able to understand who they are, let alone how they show up in the world and in their relationships. Psychologically, I can explain why these systems are upheld, but I'm curious from a political perspective, from a religious perspective, what have you seen in your studies of these different, if you want to call them industries or areas of focus? What keeps the system of patriarchal thinking going?
I think there is a groupthink that happens for men, and I think there's a groupthink that happens for women. And I think the groupthink that happens for women is largely pushed onto us by men and by patriarchy.
Why has it been so hard to dismantle, in these two different areas?
because it's been around so long. But the reason why I say that is because that's really important to acknowledge. So patriarchy has created this system where our self-worth is dependent on our obedience. We are never supposed to question the rules. That's the rule of patriarchy. So if you are, especially if you're a woman, your self-worth, is everybody else is a giver of your self-worth other than yourself. So you are the only person receiving your self-worth. So you never understand. So that's why female empowerment is so important. Like the power, the nexus of power lies within yourself. But patriarchy has told you, you got to find it everywhere else. So we have self-help books. We have all these, right? Like all these industries coming at her with like, oh, you want to lose weight? You want to get smarter? You want to have a man? Like you want to, like all these things. So that's why like feminists like me or feminists like you and me are pushing out, women empowerment content, being like, no, like you got to realize your worth. And all of that is to say these two systems, government and religion, they have to do with people's psyche. Like like as long as the players in the playing field don't question the rules and ask the judges and the referees why the playing field is so uneven, and they keep trying to take out other players, judges and referees in the system don't have to do any work. And that's why I hate patriarchy, because it's so cunning that way. We're always dividing and conquering. We're always fighting against each other. So that's why that whole, right? Oh, there's only, and that's also a very, that all of that is it's so the playing field is inherently competitive, and that's why I say capitalistic patriarchy is evil. Like it's just evil. Like you take capitalism and patriarchy, and we have capitalistic patriarchy, which is what we have. And all of that comes from this scarcity mindset, right? So like her win is my loss, and that's misogyny. So a lot of women have internalized, oh, she's winning. Like, wait a minute, but there are only 2 seats at the table. There's only one guy, one good guy. So like I have to take her out. Never mind that whoever gave you this rule, like whoever told you this reality, told you a really messed up reality. So start holding that person accountable. So government and religion both had, like, that's why I'm so glad you're a psychologist, because psychologists are awesome. They play such an important role, because these two institutions, the way they messed us over is through playing with our psyche and toying with our self-esteem and toying with our self-worth. And that's why we see like a bunch of these people running around upholding patriarchy, not realizing that they're upholding them.
The way that I think about it is that, it really kind of boils down to what compels human behavior. And when we look at what some of the teachings of feminism tell us, essentially, we could make the assumption that power is what drives human behavior, right? To uphold a patriarchal system. But as a psychologist, I want to understand why. Why is power so important? Why is there such a premium on power and such a sense of scarcity around it? And I think that really speaks to the scarcity mindset that you're referring to, because obviously there are many different gradations of abundance or lack thereof in our culture across the world. But if we pooled all of our resources together, there would be no scarcity, right? And so that to me is the biggest hiccup to get over here, is this myth of scarcity. And why are we all fighting for what there is plenty of if we just got out of our own way?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And also it speaks to how unimaginative the system is.
Yes.
And capitalistic patriarchy literally cannot think of another way but to pit each other against each other, because it's tunnel visioned. It's a very narrow mindset, that we can't reimagine a different way of being with each other and treating each other and treating the resources, right? So it's, the collaboration is much more creative and imaginative than competition.
Yes.
So you cut that off, we have competition, like, which is a system that is, that is appealing to our base instinct.
Yes.
So that's why, so all of this is to say patriarchy sucks. Like,
Can we say that one more time for the cheap seats in the back? Seriously. It's such an oppressive ideology. And I think the thing that's so dangerous about it, you said this in one of your recent TikToks, we're not just thrust into this system as it is. Frogs don't stay in a pot of boiling water, but when they start in a bath of cold water and the heat gets turned up, they don't even realize that they're getting cooked. And that's what's happened to all of us, because no matter who we are in life, we have a relationship to the systems that feed the culture around us, shape the minds of our parents and immediate family, and our siblings and our friends and our peer groups and the media. So it's a giant feedback loop always. And it's really difficult sometimes to disentangle our own individual thought and experience from that of the collective, because the shared human experience is what keeps us connected and what keeps us alive. And I think it's a big part of what compels these systems forward, because if I challenge myself to change and the people in my most immediate circles are not yet ready for that change, what's going to happen to those relationships? Well, they might not be there for me. So I think that one of the reasons, from my perspective, that it's so difficult to preempt change and there's such a resistance to change is that we don't know what's on the other side of that. And so when we don't know what we don't know, we cling to what's familiar, even if it's uncomfortable. And when we are ready to change and the people around us aren't, and we love those people or we depend on those people for survival, in reality or in our mind's mind, it's really challenging to step away, because then you're alone. And that could represent an existential threat that most people, A, aren't even conscious of, and B, have a really difficult time navigating, because we are wired for connection and we're wired for love. So we'll get it even if it's not as soft and nurturing as we might want it to be. So I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about kind of your definition of feminism and intersectional feminism. How are they similar? How are they different?
Yeah, that is such an important question. Like, when I became a feminist was
Mm-hmm.
when other people started calling me a feminist.
Oh,
Right? Isn't that interesting? So, like,
yeah.
for me, at that point in my life, I didn't even really know what feminism was. All I did was to work for women's independence.
Mm-hmm.
And then people started calling me a feminist. So to me, if working for female independence is what gets me to be a feminist, then I'm a feminist, right? So to me, I never, because feminism is the equality is the end goal, and we have
Mm-hmm.
patriarchy, and so we can't just hop over from patriarchy to equality in one step. We have to go through the process, and this process is feminism. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we say process because it's the constantly evolving organism.
Mm-hmm.
It's a collaborative process. There's an inherent collaboration in that. So there are people in pain and growing out of pain, and people trying to learn and listen to each other. That's all included in this process. That's the whole thing is feminism.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I'm an accidental feminist, because people started calling me feminist when I started advocating for women, and not even women, just women's independence. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember when the comment that I made to one of the professors who called me a feminist was that I said that women should not be forced to choose between public justice and personal happiness. Right, it's like it's either you be a single woman
Mm-hmm.
and like fight for justice, or like you lower your standards a little and then you marry a guy and have kids and raise his, like,
Mm-hmm.
these two things. Women should either be able to have both, because we're human beings.
Mm-hmm.
This dichotomy, that this choices, like, should not be, it should not be, they should not be a forced set of choices. And
Mm-hmm.
I started fighting for women's independence and financial freedom and academic freedom, like all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And the professor looked at me and said, "Are you a feminist?" And I remember looking at him and was like, "Okay, number one, I don't know what that means, but if that's what it means to be a feminist, then I'm a feminist." And that's kind of how I was, born into this role. And
Mm-hmm.
ever since I stayed with it, because why wouldn't you fight for women's independence,
Yeah.
right? What's just what if you're not in favor of women's independence, like you got to ask yourself, like what the hell, like what are you doing,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I mean, it's so true. And I think, sometimes the word feminist is like the worst F word ever. It can be such a polarizing term. And I didn't even realize that when I first started learning about feminism, because the way it was introduced to me is feminism is a construct that demands everyone is treated equally. And
Mm.
to me, I was like, well, duh, of course. Of course, yes, we should all be treated equally, regardless of our gender, regardless of our age, our ethnicity, our race, our wallet, any of it, right? Why would any of us not be treated as whole, equal, worthwhile human beings? It didn't even dawn on me that we weren't. That's how entrenched I was in the system of patriarchy. I had drank so much Kool-Aid and didn't even realize the level of oppression that I was living in.
Mhm.
So I just sort of bumbled my way through life and proudly announced that I was a feminist, because of course I would be, right? Especially as a psychologist, I advocate for all of the people that I work with, regardless of their gender,
Mhm.
and all of the other variables that make up of who they are. So I never really understood the pushback that I was getting in the dating world, or with family, or in friend groups. Oh gosh, don't tell people you're a feminist. Oh gosh, that'll be really off-putting. And really, it was flummoxing to me that that there's even a word for it, and a word needed for equality.
Mhm.
But I really hear, what you're saying in terms of being an advocate for women's rights, and really helping women see a path away from oppression. But I think the gift inherent in that for men is that they don't have to bear all of the responsibility for taking care of women and children. That's a lot of pressure.
Mhm.
That's a lot of pressure. And I feel like if there's one inherent gift of feminism across the board for gender, is that it divvies up the pool of responsibility, and it says, hey, we all can contribute in a way here, whether even if people in relationships still adhere to more divided, chores around the home, or things of that nature. But feminism really is about treating each other with equal respect, and paying an equal amount of credibility to work that is considered feminine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think you hit that nail in the head too. Like, right, yeah, it's uplifting that pressure from men to
Yeah.
be sole provider of a household, but also just, I mean, I really want the fathers to get to know their children,
Yes.
right? Like, he must, like, to me, we all want to get rid of societal ills, and the role of a father is really important.
Hmm.
So it is in everyone's interest to make sure that fathers nurture their children, and there's nothing biologically stopping men from playing the nurturing role. It's all
Right.
socialization.
Yes.
So like you said, we're all geared towards human connections.
Hmm.
It's a beautiful thing, father loving their children, and I think patriarchy is in the way of that.
Hmm.
uh, and what I mean by that is, because in patriarchy, like this role of protection and the authority, and this rigid role that a father is supposed to play, to me that's not love, right? Like, to me, when I talk about fathers, and when I talk about, oh, what, people ask me, what do you think needs to happen, for
Hmm.
feminism to be successful? I think we need to start loving our children. That's it, right? Like,
Yes.
by that I mean just fucking support them.
Yeah.
Like, if
Yeah.
the boy wants to go and play with glitter, then support him. If a girl wants to go fuck shit up without hurting other people, then go ahead and support her. Like, we just have to love them for who they are. And we somehow, like, all of us are freaking out when we find out who our children really are. And we're just like, oh no, you can't be that. Like, you have to, no, you're supposed to be like this, like, because of your gender. Like, it's that's to me hate, right? Like, that to me is
it's abuse.
It is. And it's, it's, we human beings, like, apart from like other animal species, are supposed to strive for self-actualization. And parents and adults and teachers and all these institutions getting in the way of children being getting that place, I think that's hate. And as you said, abuse. So why aren't you a feminist?
Yeah. Well, I think you really were spot on when you said this. And forgive me, I was just watching like 10 of your TikToks, so I don't remember if you said this in this conversation or one of your TikToks that I was just watching. But you were talking about how men who won't call themselves a feminist are really afraid of being associated with anything that is feminine and therefore not masculine, right? And I think that's really spot on. And so when we think back to, again, what compels human behavior, it's identity, and how I see myself impacts my sense of security in my group, the group that I've determined is important to me, and the group within which I will get my needs met. So if I am trying so hard to be perceived as a man, right, the definition that I've been given of that is tough, not soft, right? Shrewd, not malleable or open-minded and flexible, right? Distant, closed off from my feelings. And if I show emotions, so if I don't fit this very rigid cookie cutter definition of what I've been given, then I might get rejected from the men, right? And if I'm rejected from them, then what do I do? Am I not a man? And that's really challenging for a lot of men to think about. Or will I be abused by men who do adhere to this, strong, tough, rigid role? So I think men are in a really, really challenging spot. And one of the biggest obstacles that I see in terms of helping the feminist movement, or if we want to call it a humanist movement, whatever word fits for people, a movement of less aggression, less violence, less hate, more equality, more consideration, more empathy. We really do have to start looking at how are we socializing our children? How are we treating them? And what are the models for how to be that they are given? And I know a lot of parents think they're doing what's best for their children by saying things like, men don't cry, or don't be a pussy, or all the things, right? Because that's the instruction manual that they've been given about how to be a man, or how to grow a man, how to be a woman, how to grow a woman. But when we aren't willing to look at what is actually our neurobiological truths, what are our neurobiological truths, then we get stuck with nothing more than a prescribed set of ideas. And that is incongruent with who most of us are. And I think that's why we're so uncomfortable and so rooted in making sure we get that scarcity. And I don't think the scarcity is money. I don't think the scarcity is food. I think it's emotional and relational needs being met.
So one movement that I would love to see, to be included in feminism is redefining sexy. Like redefining what is attractive. Because to me, I don't know about you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I have masculine traits, right? Like I'm more of a, like I'm more, I just have never, been that, good girl. And to me, men who cry, men who show their emotions, men who are empathetic, and men who are considerate are so sexy, right? Like they're so
the sexiest. Yeah.
Right? Like, and I see, and then I come across men who are like, oh, let me shoot some guns. And I'm like, oh, get the fuck out of my face, right? Like it's like, right. So there are this toxic masculinity, and the men who say, "Oh, hey, let me provide for you and let me protect you," like all that. That is not attractive. Like I don't think a lot of men realize that. And
Mm-hmm.
there's even research, so many research that is done on this. Like when we look at a male leader, we want to see somebody who is going to empathize with their subordinates.
Mm-hmm.
And it plays a big role in who, you know, who's respected, and who,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and who is, you know, who's reputable, because reputation is built on, you know, sustainable relationships.
Right.
um so there's there are so many practical benefits to a man being empathetic, and yet
Mm-hmm.
we still are not talking about that enough, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love to see more women and more men, more not more women talk about that, you know,
Mm-hmm.
talk about how sexy it is that a man
Yeah.
can, can cry and, be open and honest and
Mm-hmm.
transparent, and not care about what other people think, and not care about what other men think.
Yeah.
I think that's super attractive. So,
Well, I'm right there with you. Any partner of mine needs to have tremendous emotional intelligence and relational intelligence, because those are my values. But I understand that there are a lot of people out there who maybe haven't been given that, template in life, or they haven't learned it at some point in their lives. And so it may not be as appealing to them. And they do tend to sort of fall back into this idea of what is sexy as for a man is sort of rough and tumble and take no nonsense and don't show weakness. But I really do think that, especially in generations like maybe late Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z, there does seem to be a little bit of a paradigm shift, but also more of a bifurcation. I don't know if you're seeing this in your work too, but I've been noticing that there are significant groups of young men who are so much more emotionally aware and communicative, right? And then there's also a large group of men who are clinging more and more to these ideas of sort of, masculinity, meaning that you don't have a feeling, and the only feelings you're allowed to express are anger or pride. How can we make this okay for men to begin cracking that code, right? So for men who really are stuck in that rigid confine of what we're calling toxic masculinity. And I want to be really clear, when I use that word, I don't mean to say that men are bad. I don't like the line that men are trash at all. I think that's a bullshit line, because men aren't trash. They are a product of the environment that they've been raised in, and they've been raised in a patriarchal world too that has told them they have to show up a certain way or else. One of the questions that I wanted to talk about with you today is, how do we create a path forward, in your opinion, where it's safe for men to start inching toward a more integrated place, right? More integrated, like thoughts and feelings, where they don't have to be shamed forever and ever, even at all, for having, upheld a certain mindset or set of beliefs if they're making change moving forward. Because I think that's one of the biggest places where men are afraid to say things like, wow, I'm a part of this system, or, oh God, I can't believe I did this thing or that thing. I don't want to be that guy. I think it's a huge clash with how they see themselves.
yeah, and that's very threatening.
It is, of
Yeah,
course.
and that's why patriarchy is so cunning, because it's a really evil system, because it all it does is shame people into a role. Like it's,
Hmm.
to have people, to extract obedience out of people, it has to shame people. It has to
Hmm.
play up people's fears. And that's why I
Yeah.
hate this system so much. Because it's, what kind of system plays on people's fears and, shaming people for it to work, right?
Hmm.
Only patriarchy. So I that is one thing that I wanted to say. But also I think this is where the men who grew up with amazing, strong role models
Mm.
um, of women have to step up.
Yeah.
Um, the challenge of me being a female feminist is that I do not have the social power and the position and the privilege of a man. And so men take cues from each other. They have the social power that I do not. And so when these good male allies, and when I say good male allies, I'm talking about a certain subset of men who really, they're out there, they're good men, they're
They are
human beings. And they really need to step up and start talking to the rest of the men, and really addressing them. And there are men who do that. And what I found to be true of all those good genuine male allies is that they can very fluently point to women who have inspired them, who inspire them daily, who they look up to, like who they really respect and admire, and who they really appreciate. Because and they have this female respectability as it's ingrained in them, right? So it's women don't exist as sexual beings or sexual objects. They actually exist as neighbors and mothers and colleagues and bosses, teachers, and all these human beings who are functioning and who have all these characteristics that they want to emulate. So good men are out there. They exist and they are doing their work. But it's this space that needs to be created for men in general. Those men have to lead it, have to lead that space. And that's why I keep saying, like, genuine male allies, can we, we gotta encourage genuine male allies. We gotta work with genuine male allies, because they have tremendous power to reshape this landscape. And unfortunately, we do not. We women just don't. So we either, it's the option is we have to unionize, which won't happen because there are plenty of women with internalized misogyny. So we have to work with these good male allies. So we do want men in feminism.
We do. Oh my God. We need men. We need men in feminism, just like men need women in feminism. We all need each other, and there's just no getting around that. I think the goal of feminism is to start valuing each other equally, and you hit it right on the head, right? The people who are allies to the movement of feminism, regardless of their gender, are people who have learned to see the gestalt of the human being instead of the object of what that human can do for them. And they don't objectify, really. They have a focus on humanizing and seeing each person as a whole total of all of their experiences, their parts, their emotions, their contributions to the world, their fears, right? If we really start to humanize each other more fervently, then I think we have a good chance of healing the underlying wounds that compel people to stay rigidly fixed in a system that is stacked against everyone, regardless of gender.
Yeah, and I think a lot of women, are also getting stuck between, between these two narratives of we need feminism in men and women don't need men. And these two are, I think this is a really good opportunity to, clarify that, those two narratives, because when we say we need men in feminism, we're appealing to the interconnectedness of human beings.
Yes.
We're not saying, we're not pushing forward this agenda that which is part of patriarchy that goes, women need men, right? Like men be whole human beings. Like that's not what we're saying. It's understanding that that person's pain is my own, and that person's struggle is my own. I had a part to play in that person's struggle. Everyone is connected to each other, and this interdependence is what makes the human world. It goes around that way. That's the narrative that, when you and I talk about, we need men in feminism. That's the narrative.
Mhm.
The women don't need men is also true, because for you to be a full human being, you do not need men.
Correct.
Men
Correct.
are not the end to your sufferings. Like they are not, they're not the savior. Like they're not
Yes.
the, right? Like,
Yeah,
so
they're not the only people who can save us from this mission, but they do need to be a part of it.
right, exactly.
We all do.
Very well put.
Yeah, we all need to be on board with treating each other equally, treating each other with respect, empathy, and compassion, because you're right. Your pain is my pain. My pain is my partner's pain. My partner's pain is his family's pain. It just, everybody is interconnected, and everything that we put out in the world has a ripple effect on the collective, and that's the same collective from which we draw our own individual, sense of self. So it's really kind of dangerous to live in a myopic world where we say things like, it doesn't matter. What good could I do? I'm only one person. I can't change a system. Feminism doesn't matter to me, or it doesn't impact me, or the patriarchy doesn't impact me, or any of that stuff, because it does, right? It is the hot water that we've all been raised in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what's one thing that you think male allies could say to other men who haven't quite taken that step yet to really help them see the light? Any ideas?
I think I want to say two things. I think first is, and I say this with, understanding that there is a social cost and like,
Mm.
cultural cost to saying these things, because
Of
men,
course.
they have this culture and they defer to each other. But I think we all need to understand that, so many rapes and so many harassments and so many abuse cases could have been stopped if one of the men in the room had said, dude, that's fucked up.
Yep.
Don't treat her that way.
Yep.
Like it would have taken one man. And because that one man didn't step up, rape happened, abuse happened, harassment happened. So it's the power of your voice. Like what men really need to understand is their really own, like really social power.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter how many times I can say that, like 500 times, and they will still go like, she's right. Like
she's a feminist.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it's the dismissal that women face,
Yep.
as part of being a woman, is not a common experience for men, especially when they are listening to each other, when they're hanging out with each other. And so I need you to introduce to your male bond disruption of respect, of female respectability.
Yeah.
And good male allies do that, and that that's why I keep saying they're the most like remarkable, like they're really selfless, wonderful human beings, because they assume those risks, right? Like the men who know these things and don't do it, and men who know these things and still do it, the difference is these people are taking the risk. Right, these are the people who are saying, I know what's gonna take. I know, like they're probably gonna look at me and attack my masculinity, and they have homophobia and heterosexism, but it doesn't matter to me. Like I'm still gonna state my piece. So it's the bravery and the courage and that the resilience, like those pieces are present with good male allies. And so that's one thing that I wanted to say. I think the second thing is, I think they're addressing men and just saying, dude, that's so fucked up, like don't do that, like that can go a really long way. But also when you address your fellow men, point to the women who are doing the hard work, who you respect, who you inspire, and who you appreciate, and promote her, right? Like it's that's advocacy, right? So you're literally you're literally inserting your body and your mind and your social power so that she gets amplified and she is heard and taken seriously to these men who otherwise wouldn't listen to her.
Yeah.
So you're pointing and you're allocating your social power and say, that's the woman you should be listening to. Right. So, and good male allies do this, and they do this really fluently, and they do it really well. Right. So I know they exist. It's just they're not on TikTok performing. Right. Like, sorry. I feel really passionate about this because it's, I mean, no, like it's, I don't mean to say that. Like, I mean to say, you know, there are a lot of good male allies on TikTok too. But like, I say this because like so many women, I see so many women like who send me this stuff like on TikTok. Oh my God, like he's the hope for humanity. And it's like, women, he only talked about the fact that we all need to care about feminism once. Like, will you just like let him
Right.
show it to you? Like,
once is a good start, but let's see if it's a pattern.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And when no women are looking, I think is what I'm really hearing you say, right? When allies to any movement do the hard work when nobody from the movement is looking. Exactly. And that's really key, right? Women don't need to know that you're doing this stuff, guys, if you're out there, but challenge it when there's nobody to give you a gold star. Challenge it when there's nobody to say, you know, thank you. Do it because you know it's right, because we know that you know it's right. And that's what, in my opinion, makes people respectable, right? When they do the hard work, even when nobody's looking.
I think that's why I get really frustrated with the performative male allies.
Yeah.
Like I really hate them. Like I think I hate them more than I hate the Proud Boys.
Yeah.
Like because
that says a lot.
Right? Because the Proud Boys don't bother me. Like what am I gonna do with them? Like they're just, you know, they're out there doing their stuff. Like like these performative male allies they're inherently, I mean, I think they're really problematic. They you know, how many stories have I heard where a man used his, you know, public platform for feminism and to acquire female attention, all the while abusing and raping women in his own life, in his personal life, right? And it's good male allies know that their journey begins with introspection. So really taking a hard look at, how am I treating women in my life? Like, how have I been treating women in my life? So they try, you know, they wear feminism in their lives, and so their work is often behind the doors, and they're you know, they're very brave when they're coming to you know, insert themselves when a woman is getting attacked in public, when she's using her voice. But performative male allies, they're really right, they're appropriating our movement for their ego,
for
and
their own gains.
Exactly, entitlement. And I think that's inherently predatory, exploitative. And I think that's more damaging to women than Proud Boys, because Proud Boys, we know that they're evil. Like we don't want to associate with them.
Right.
Performative male allies, they're like, I think it, you know, it fucks with your head. And
yeah, well, I mean, it's operating under the guise of, I can be trusted, I will support you, but the intentions, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, are very incongruent with that message. And so it is really dangerous when anybody does performative social justice, because again, when we have those sort of ego gains at stake, then we're really not supporting the movement at all.
Yeah, exactly.
This has been so eye-opening and so enjoyable. Thank you so much. I would love to have you back on so we can talk about what women can do to support the movement and really kind of address that internalized misogyny piece. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Modern Intimacy. Follow our show on your favorite podcast app by going to modernintimacy.com/podcast. And while you're there, don't forget to enter in a question or a topic idea for future episodes. That's modernintimacy.com/podcast. This show is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for therapy or psychiatric care. Listening to this show or submitting questions or topic ideas does not constitute a therapeutic or professional relationship with Dr. Kate Balestrieri or any providers that work at Modern Intimacy. If you're having a medical or psychiatric emergency, please call 911 or go to your nearest emergency room. All opinions expressed by guests on this show are those of the guests only and are not necessarily indicative of those opinions held by Dr. Kate Balestrieri or staff at Modern Intimacy. Thank you for listening to today's show. For more episode information and helpful tips, visit modernintimacy.com or follow us on Instagram at @themodernintimacy or follow Dr. Kate on Instagram and TikTok at Dr. Kate Balestrieri. See you next week.